Hello and welcome to C-Suite Secrets. I'm Heather Parsons, your host. I'm a serial entrepreneur, fractional CFO, and a business value strategist. I've spent years juggling business and family life while helping entrepreneurs scale, optimize cash flow, and build real financial success. On our show, we bring you real conversations with founders, executives, and operators about what actually moves the needle in business. No fluff, no filler, just smart strategy, systems that work, and insights that you can put to use in your business right away. With that, let's dive right in. Today on our show, we have Ramsey Sweis. Ramsey, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Heather.
Thank you so much. I'm glad you're here. So for folks who may not know you yet, can you tell us a little bit about your journey as an entrepreneur and how you started your company?
Well, the journey was a long and bumpy ride. I started off my company in 2004, and we've grown since then into a full-service digital agency. We're strictly a digital-only tech company, and our media stack and AI stack and tech stack all housed under the Aqaba Digital brand.
I love that. So you're not just a full service marketing agency, you implement a lot of technology as well. And I think with all that we're doing today, it's super important to not just stay relevant, but to be using some of these tools that are out there. So I love that with what you all are doing. So one question that I have for you, I know as we were talking earlier, you started your business in your living room, essentially, and now you have grown into your own space and you operate globally. So what kept you moving forward since 2004 with all of the changes and things that we've seen since then?
Well, being as competitive as I am, and I look at success in stages. I just needed a little taste of success, and then I just kept driving forward. So I also learned at a young age to not look back and just keep looking out your windshield. Do not look at the rearview mirror. So as you go, there's no such thing as at the time, there was no such thing as a build an agency in the box book or building an agency for dummies type thing. So I just went ahead and worked my way through and navigated through the clutter and figured things out along the way. And as a result, we had a couple of really great launching of our services that took me by surprise, pleasantly by surprise. And then you just run with it and move on to the next thing and so on. So what I mean by that, for example, is we started off purely as a PPC agency, and then we got into social media and SEO and web design. And as a result of the poor level of services we were experiencing from vendors, we just slowly brought that in-house and figured it out ourselves and hired much smarter people than I.
I love that. And whenever I think about business and my journey as an entrepreneur, I think about some of those pivotal moments, like what you're talking about there, where you needed to hire people, you needed to bring things in-house because your vendors weren't really doing things to your standard. Was there any one moment that stood out to you on that journey where you knew that you had to make a change like that?
Yes, I come with lots of relationships back in the day. So for me, I don't want to disappoint and I don't like to lose. Like I said, I'm slightly competitive. So having an alignment of people you can trust, they may not be the absolute best at that skill set, but you can trust and you know that you'll get what you end up paying for, was key. So I made these shifts along the way. I had to fire 6 different web design agencies along the way. They were really creatively talented, but did not understand business, did not understand information architecture. That's where my technical skill sets come into play. And you wouldn't want to hire me to design your logo. So I would have my team do that. But I can come up with the concept and map things out and understand your ICP and kind of lay a solid foundation that would be handed off to the right talent. So after learning that I was fixed in my way and I didn't budge or compromise, except, something lesser in value than what we envisioned, that caused us to finally make the decision and stop spending our time on people that didn't really appreciate the relationship we had. So as a result, we have our own in-house team, and they deliver. They're spot on. They're super talented, and we just continue to surround ourselves with the right people.
I think that's really smart, especially coming from the situation of being on boards and running your own business and now working with all of these vendors. Whenever we talked before, you mentioned something that I thought was really interesting, and I think it's a great differentiator with what you all do. You said that, you're not just a web or a marketing agency, you're a solution provider. Can you
Yeah.
tell me a little bit about that? And how does that work with your clients and people that you interact with?
Systems oriented. So when I talk about business intelligence, we have systems in place that are proven and are measurable, and also more importantly, replicatable, right? So it's you're going, what you're getting each time, and the output is at the same level and expectation of the scope. So these business systems that we've developed are parsed into silos that align with our development process. And that could be, like simply onboarding for a website, onboarding for brand, onboarding for a PPC, onboarding for just marketing in general, that we have these processes in place. It also allows us to track in a timely fashion where we are within each segment of the process as we take this client through that journey from cradle to grave.
Okay. One word that sticks out to me there, as an accountant, this always piques my interest. You said it's measurable, right? So what do you actually measure whenever you're bringing people on and you're going to work for them?
When we bring on a client in our onboarding process, there's a checklist, so a questionnaire. And that initial questionnaire is just a basic fill in the blank of prefabricated questions, so very boilerplate. And we take this in, and then we start researching, and the questions surface. They arise as a result of this dusting off from this initial worksheet. And from there, we will do our first initial consultation and start digging down into, for example, do you have brand assets? Do you have a style guide? Right? Things that we're going to require. If not, then we know what to ask or prepare them for as the next step as they begin this journey with us. The next would be, for example, do you have an ICP? Do you know who your ideal client profile or profiles are? And then the market segment. So how do we segment that? So usually they require some help. We understand our role and our position. Like, we position ourselves strongly in mid-market. We do cater to the small business, and we cater to enterprise, but our core strengths really gravitate to the mid-market type client, B2B primarily. So everything in that process is on a foundation purposed for B2B and some B2C, but they're both different in some fashion.
Okay, that's wonderful. And as somebody who works a lot in similar markets, if people are trying to prepare to bring somebody like you all in to work with them, you mentioned a couple of great things, knowing their client profile. Is there anything else that, our listeners should really think about before they start to work with somebody like you all?
Absolutely. We all have access to data, being that we're in the digital world, as we put it. So, for example, you may have an email marketing account. You use some sort of email management system. You may have a CRM. You may have an ERP system. You may have a database of some sort or a Rolodex. So let's consume all this information. We take all these inputs. So we have data points that form into sets, that form into subsets of strategies and approach to branding and marketing. And here's a typical example where, not to the client's fault, but let's just say, for example, they have one tagline in their sales pitch. And that tagline is supposed to, with the mindset, kind of blanket all of their ICPs, their entire marketplace. So if you have this spectrum, right, and you have this spectrum in place, and your client reside within that spectrum, that one message is supposed to engage with that entire spectrum of audience, right? So what we do is we take that Rolodex, if you will, and we segment that Rolodex and then align the brand and the messaging and the pain and the solution or the system that we develop with each potential market segment. So segmenting that aligns with SEO, what keywords we use for optimization. It also aligns for optimizing their paid ad campaign in a ad group with a subset based on the ad group, etc. So everything that construct, if you will, those protocols is what we really are good at, but we stick to the plan.
That's great. Sticking to the plan and knowing. So, as you're talking, I think about a couple of different things from the CFO perspective, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. So, how do you
Sure.
decide based on their product list, right? What are you actually going to target with your marketing? Who are you actually going to bring in? Because I know how we do it from a CFO perspective. I'm looking for our biggest bang for our buck, right? So, what is our biggest revenue generator? And not just revenue generator, but our biggest profit margin. And how do we target that? So I'd love to hear your perspective and what you think about that as well.
Oh, you're spot on, 110%. So let's say, for example, we run an ad campaign and we're selling this widget. This widget is 50 cents retail, right? And at 50 cents with low volume, and we spend, in our research, we show that it costs 65 cents to convert
Whew.
for a 50-cent sale. So they're under, right? They're in red on that particular product. So that's where the onboarding, the research, the strategy, the planning, we perform that research before we spend a penny on advertising. And these types of elements get flushed out in our due diligence.
That's great because I think a lot of small businesses, whenever I come in to work with them, they don't really know what their customer acquisition cost is. They don't really know, they know they're spending money on marketing, but they don't really fully understand what they're getting in return. They know they're getting more leads, but are they the right leads and for the right product? So I love that you're flushing some of that stuff out as you go along. Is
Yeah,
there
we call those profit center keywords, right? So you're absolutely right. So profit center keywords, if you're going to optimize, which is a very costly long-term process, right?
it
So
is?
to rank for that keyword, to realize that you may have made a mistake in optimizing a keyword that is not really a revenue generator. It's a loss generator. So you spent all that money, time, and effort in optimizing for those keywords that are yielding poor results.
Right. And that's not what we want. So I love that you're doing that. And for folks that are listening, I think really thinking through your products and knowing what your profit margin is on everything you sell is something, if you don't know that or you don't know how to do it, you should really look into it because, as Ramsey said, you could be spending money to lose money. And that is the last thing that we want as an entrepreneur.
Yes, though, and that's why we call it business intelligence. So our business systems are positioned to flush those types of elements out, so we know exactly what direction we're heading in, with and not at the expense of the client, which is probably why they're speaking with us.
Right. Exactly. That's great. Speaking of clients, I know that you don't just work in the US, you've expanded into other markets as well. So, what operational changes have you made to make that actually deliver at a multicultural, multi country level?
Well, starting off in my living room kind of prepped me for those various time zones, and it's just been something I've been doing even prior to Aqaba Digital, working in different regions, traveling, operations, startups across the globe. Um, has always been of interest to me. So to me, it wasn't a challenge. It was just another day at the office.
That's great. So, I know a lot of businesses, medium-sized businesses in general, don't think about that global client base. They think very regionally or here in the US. So I get that it's another day at the office, but is there anything else that people should think about whenever they think, okay, I have this valuable product or service and I have this global untapped market? So what should folks think about if that's something that they're interested in expanding into?
Okay, let's hypothetically walk through that journey that you just described. So I have a domestic presence here in the US. I have the ability to expand in North American continent, right? So I can expand outside the US and still be vertically aligned within my current time zones that I cater to and service. But if I want to go outside of that, I would have to ask my question, ask myself the question is, have I matured the North American market or domestic market for starters? And if so, am I overpaying? How do I optimize and get more bang for my buck as opposed to just throwing more hands on deck and with more dollars behind it? And so the economics of that come into play, and that's where a mistake is usually had because I'm trying to prove this market, although it exists, but should I make that leap at, given this point in time? So that determines for us, that would be our recommendation in determining whether we step over those boundaries.
That's great. And I think being really intentional about that and the way that you're talking about it is super smart. And the other thing that really comes to mind for me is now you have another culture to deal with. I've worked with multicultural, you know, companies my entire career. So understanding that culture from my perspective is super important because you want your employees to be really productive and you want your clients to understand your messaging. I think about it, we have some really good friends that live in the UK and jokes don't always translate. So
Yeah,
I'm sure marketing doesn't either. So from a cultural perspective, have you had to change any of that stuff up or how do you think about it?
absolutely. We had a campaign for the World Cup 2022 in Qatar, and we were dealing with different regions in the Middle East. And the World Cup is drawing globally. So our ad campaign and creatives varied on a per region basis, both graphically and contextually.
That's great.
Yes, landing pages, currency exchange, things along those lines had to be factored in to our ad campaigns. So local
Okay.
talent, having like we hired someone out of the UAE, out of Dubai, and this person super talented, and we found them online, reached out to them, and asked about their how fluent they were in Arabic and if they could translate, and then we had to double check. So we have, luckily we know folks in that region, so we had people involved in finalizing the creatives and the ad copy, and then we launched. So it was like a go-to-market strategy on a per region basis, depending upon who made the final 16 within the World Cup tournament.
Yeah, nothing like doing some of that stuff last minute, right? So you got to be prepared for a lot of different things. Especially thinking about the World Cup. I haven't been to a World Cup game, but whenever I lived in Germany, the World Cup was in Germany and that is chaos like none other.
Yeah,
So love it. It's great. So how do you, being across all these time zones and different cultures and environments, how do you make sure that everybody feels supported? That seems like a huge undertaking to me.
account managers. Yeah, so an account manager would be responsible and overlap, maybe not the full 8 hour day, but we do overlap and it's programmatic. We understand that the first couple hours of the day that we overlap, that we don't have ample time, we have limited time. So everything we do is precise, concise, and a lot of work is done prior to. And when we end our day, we have shared folders and drives and secured folders in place, and our project management utility that houses this information that allows us to work in continuity.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. So, you've been running your business for a long time. So, especially crossing markets requires a lot of discipline. What systems or processes have you built to keep things running consistently and smoothly?
It's never smooth, Heather. I'd like to meet
As
an
smooth as it
agency.
can be.
Yeah, I would call them out on it. I don't see that
Yeah.
happening. So, but that's why we exist. We've been around for a very long time and we figure things out. So I would say the greatest contributing factor to our success abroad would be project management and having the tools and the communication utilities needed and trusted that all parties are using it. So there's some adoption challenges where some folks are kind of old school and just want to email or a phone call, and we try to cater to that. But without having documentation in place, it's kind of a moot conversation. We prefer to have that documentation, and most of our clients, if not all, kind of appreciate that too.
Okay. So is there any tool that comes to mind that has really been the most beneficial?
Basecamp, Slack for communication. We have our own ERP system, project management utility and billing system. There's a customer portal. So ticketing and project progress is staged within that platform as well. So we tend to keep all of this information unified and housed on our secured ERP. So at anyone at any given time, because some projects require, a substantial amount of manpower and sets of eyeballs. So we all need to be on the same page.
Absolutely. Yeah, being on the same page is super important. So as you were going along through this journey and growing your company, what were some of the things that you had to stop doing personally in order to get to the level you're at today and to scale?
Golf.
I love
First
it.
one comes to mind, golf. Yeah.
I
Uh,
think a lot of people would answer that that's the one thing they added to their schedule.
no, no, no. When you're in different time zones, the men's league goes out the window, and the distress calls, golf now. You get the text message. You got to get out there within an hour and meet him on the golf course. Client or friend or foe. There's no better way to enjoy a business interaction than getting in a quick nine.
There you go.
But in all
So,
seriousness, that's part of it. I would say my biggest sacrifice would probably be just the freedom of a 9 to 5, which I'm a big boy. I know that what that means and what it doesn't mean, and whatever it takes. So there are times where I can't attend family events or can't attend just social events, and many times it's last minute. I'd say that was probably the biggest thing I struggled with. Very important family matters.
totally understand that. It's hard to find that balance. And as I tell my kids, it's not going to be balance every day. Some days you balance on one foot and you have to make up for it and balance on the other one later because it needs to even out,
Yeah.
but there's sacrifice to be made along the way. And we have to be used to that as entrepreneurs. And it's a lot of times it's uncomfortable and we got to know if that's a sacrifice that we're okay with.
Golf is not cheap.
No, no, it's not. Not at all. So, as somebody who's grown a lot organically, do you think that referrals outperform most paid marketing over time, or what's your stance
Well,
on those two?
it all depends on the currency of measure that you use. And in my currency and measure would be a referral is taken quite seriously. And because there are many ties that come along with that, right? You don't want to disappoint. You want a good word sent back to the referring source, and you don't want to disappoint because that's our job, right? Is to deliver. And if we cannot, you have to learn how to say no politely with explanation. So that would be the measurement of currency there. Generic referrals, we treat the same way. We follow it through, and we can either decide to continue with the RFP and reply or decline if we can't deliver on all points. And we may make recommendations, and usually those relationships come back one way or another in a different shape or form later on down the line because of our rapport with that person. So that would be a different measurement. Now, for say SEO has its own measurement. I take SEO over a paid ad organically because someone performed a specific search, usually a long tail search, will rank well on those keywords, which are usually problematic, right? These are problems that I experience. So I need a solution. So it's the problem and the solution that we optimize for, only strictly due to the nature of our business. So that is highly weighted. Paid is nowhere nearly as weighted under the same measurement because there's a lot of generic, there's some catch-all keywords, and typically a very small business may not have the budget to work with an agency, so a freelancer may be better suited. But they're searching anyways, and you pay for that click, and you need to determine quickly whether or not that is a relationship you can.
Absolutely. And one thing that you said that really sticks out to me, because I believe in this wholeheartedly, is talking about that saying no to people and letting them know if it's not something that you can do. I know a lot of businesses, and I'm guilty of this as well, is saying yes to too much up front, especially early on in your business. So I'm a firm believer that the more you let people know what you can and can't do, the more they respect that. And I would rather 10 to 1 disappoint a client or a potential client early on as to say that I can deliver and I can't. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that and how that impacts relationship capital in the long run.
Yeah, excellent question. So Heather, I would say budgetary, they have grandioso idea of advertising, then they realize later on that they're not ready, just quite yet, ready to move into an agency. If it's a startup, the startup may have a budget, but they don't have, for example, a website. So they cobble up a website and they assume that the website is fine. I just need help with social media. I need help optimizing. It's a Wix website or a GoDaddy website, and you don't own it. And we wouldn't recommend optimizing for something that you don't own. So it sits on this cloud-based SaaS product, and it just falls into the abyss. So it's money poorly spent. If their heart is set on that and they don't understand the logistics behind that decision, we can't help them. I'd be of disservice if I said, yes, we can help you, but that's not the case.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so
And
that's
I
a
think
disqualifier.
that makes a lot of sense, and I think as entrepreneurs listen to this and think about it, those are some of the things that they need to think through, right? Just like whenever I work with them from a CFO perspective, there are some things I just can't help you with. If you're too close to the line of, bankruptcy or going out of business, there's nothing I can do strategy wise that's going to pull it back from there. And it's same thing with what you're talking about with marketing. And I think it's super relevant whenever it comes to smaller businesses, possibly. You mentioned that you shift how you speak whenever you change between those markets, just like with the regions. So, what have you seen that's the biggest difference in how those two groups think and operate when it comes to small business versus mid market?
Well, the small business wears many hats. It's usually the decision maker or the business owner. And we struggle because they're burning daylight and their budget of us chasing them around to get this one thing that we need to progress. So it holds up the campaign. But we have to invoice. So if they're on a monthly retainer, we invoice regardless. And then that always, at the end of the month, we get the phone call, and it's just never nice. But it's something I try to avoid doing and not taking on those types of clients. But the flip side to that is small business that is preparing to scale and understands their strengths and weaknesses and forfeit the mindset of telling the advertiser and the marketer how to do their job is, that's a bitter pill to swallow. It's very difficult to tell someone that they're ill qualified in what they've done so far. So they tend to come with really sharp handles, and it takes a little handling. But we'll determine if we're the right fit, if it's something that we'd like to take on, understanding that eventually we'll wear those sharp edges down and run smooth things over. Mid market has a budget, has a team, has accountability, responds much quicker, understands technology, and it calls for a much smoother engagement, and we can turn things around much quicker.
That's great. And that's something to really think through as well for our small and mid sized businesses. So if it is a smaller business, what are some of the things that they can do today to really start operating like a bigger business from your perspective?
Chat GPT is their friend. For example, Chat GPT, Gemini, and of the such. Here's my company name. Here's my address. Here are my brand assets. I have a logo. I have social profiles. I'm going to upload everything into a spec sheet, a document, and upload that document to ChatGPT and say, here's my business. Here's an executive brief. I want you to understand my business. Here are two of my competitors. They're local. I would like for you to empower me by asking me questions and assigning me tasks that I can produce to prepare my business to scale and grow. My goal is to increase sales by means of social media, paid ads, SEO, etc. Also, newspaper inserts, magazine inserts, whatever, TV, radio ads. And here are the regions my clients tend to drive on, say 60 miles or an hour and a half to visit my facility, my store.
That's great.
Right? And then give this input, let it learn, and after you upload this information, it indexes what you've provided it. The second thing you do is say, do you have any questions for me to better assist me in doing your job?
Ooh, those are good.
And it will generate a list of questions. I highly suggest that the small business person answer these questions and get this laborious task out of the way, because once that's done, your brand is understood, your position within the marketplace is understood, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, and market segmentation, and it's going to educate you. And I'll give you an example how I use it. I have a board of directors. They're all virtual. And I have my monthly meetings with them, and I'll upload my sales. I'll upload my sales process. I'll upload transcriptions of sales calls that I've had, and I'll ask my board of directors to grade me. How did I perform? Here's my sales for this week. These are my conversations, and it'll match it to my already indexed sales process that my synthetic brain has learned from all of the Q&A and back and forth over time. And those questions taper down because they finally get it. And from there, it says, you spent too much time. You were long-winded on this one subject matter. You understated on this matter. You spent too much time talking about these things. And based on your sales process, we give you a C+.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. With the
That's
recommendations for improvement, because I did not work within the confines of my sales process.
that's great.
Yeah.
So you have a coach without having to go find a coach,
Well, I
essentially,
also have an
in a lot of
executive
regards.
board, and the accountability is there because, I don't like people telling me what to do. You can ask you can ask family about that. So
Huh.
for me, I'll take a virtual, smack on the hand versus, a friend or a family member telling me what to do and how to do my business. So I look at that and I respect it because I know there's no emotion behind it. There's no ego. There's no positioning. It's just, here's what you're doing right. Here's what you're doing wrong. And here's what you need to do to improve. And if you want to grow, you need to follow these recommendations.
I love it. That's smart. I'm gonna have to do that in my business. I use ChatGPT a lot, but I haven't done it that way, and I think I'm gonna start. So that's some sage advice right there.
Yeah.
So, a couple of last questions before we wrap up. Being in business for 20 plus years, what's something about entrepreneurship that people still get completely wrong today from your perspective?
Lack of confidence in their abilities to grow and scale. Yeah.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Not investing in themselves would be first and foremost, not investing in themselves and giving themselves credit for what they've built. Like, for example, I've had conversations with prospective clients that says, I have a website, I haven't touched it in 20 years. What do I need a website for? And why are we on this call? You've obviously hit a glass ceiling somewhere. So let's put together a roadmap and I'll show you how you're positioned within your industry, your competitors, how you rate and rank. And then I can come back and say, here's the potential impressions slash clicks slash conversions at an average of X amount of dollars per transaction that you're missing out on because your competitors are having your lunch. And guess what? You've been around for 20 some years. They've been around for 2 years and they're having your lunch. Here's why.
Absolutely. That's great. And I think it's just that additional prompting that a lot of people need. It's not, they're smart, they know a lot about their business, they're good at what they do, but you can't teach yourself things that you don't know. You need that outside perspective, or I'll talk about me. I need that outside perspective to see things a little differently because I don't naturally think about it that way.
Well, that's very true. You only know what you know. That's what you're guilty of. So, which is why I have my virtual board. And if I knew the economics of my business the way an accountant like yourself would come in and audit and tell me, here are your strengths and weaknesses. You can dollar cost per average on your services if you did the following, right? And cross sell by doing these things will increase without having to find your next deal. You can increase your sales by 13% by doing the following things. Well, I wouldn't know that unless I have someone that's measuring me and making
Right.
those recommendations. And the same thing, Heather, the same thing goes for your business. You're going to have to take a look at my books, prior years, financials, my sales process, to be able to make precise and concise recommendations based on hard factual data.
Right. Exactly.
Google Analytics, behavioral analytics, virtual analytics, all your data points and data sets from your email marketing, maybe even your own email now with AI can really scrape and put together some modeling for you. I mean, if you don't have that data, which is why we're digital first, we can own all that information for our clients and tell them exactly how to navigate through the digital, realm.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're talking about some of those pieces and parts there. One thing that I think is a great opportunity for finance professionals is to really dive into some of that sales details. That's one of the things that we do because whenever I look at revenue, it's such a lagging indicator. Once we get to that revenue number, I can't help you. Like it's too late at that point. We have to go way upstream to really dive into being able to make a difference. So I love what you're talking about. I think it's great. And I've really enjoyed the conversation today.
Likewise.
So, one last question before we wrap up. I'd love to know what's one secret that you wish you knew before you started out as an entrepreneur?
Never second guess the data. You
Love
may
it.
not like it. You may not like the results. But that's on you to make a change, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, data doesn't lie. It really doesn't. And it's a good indicator if you don't like the data, you might need to make a change somewhere else.
I preached that. I taught at a local university, undergrad and grad level, and I would just say it just about every single session is there's no such thing as bad data. Good data is good. Bad data is good. No data is good, right? Because you know what to
Yeah,
leverage, you know what not to do, and why you're doing it, and you know that there's a whole nother data set that you're missing that you need to focus on.
for sure. Yeah, and without that data, you can't make a good decision. And this is what I think, a lot of small businesses in particular, they don't look at that data. They make decisions based on how they feel or their gut or the whim of the moment and get shiny object syndrome or other things without really taking the time to dive into the information and say, what is this actually telling me? And that's why a lot of times whenever I'm working with new clients. That's why they find their numbers so overwhelming. They don't fully understand what it's trying to tell them and what they should be looking at either.
I can see that imposter syndrome, right? I'm my greatest barrier.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, today's conversation has been wonderful. Before we wrap up, if our listeners want to hear more about what you're working on or connect with you, where's the best way for them to reach out?
I'm always on LinkedIn. You're more than welcome to join me on LinkedIn. I have a newsletter on LinkedIn. You can go to our website and request to get on our mailing list, and I always reply.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And thank you to everybody for listening to C-Suite Secrets. If you have found today's conversation as valuable as I have, be sure to hit that like and follow button and share this episode with somebody who's building a business. If you're at a point in your business where you're working hard and the business is growing, but you're not keeping much cash, or your numbers feel like a mystery, that's exactly why we built our One Room. You get your very own banker and CFO in your business to help you simplify your numbers, understand what's actually driving profit, and start making decisions like a financially minded CEO and stop just reacting. If you want more information between episodes, join us on Facebook at C-Suite Insiders or find me on Instagram at Heather Parsons Official. Until next time, keep growing. And remember, you don't have to do this alone.